There are moments that redefine everything, days that strike you with such force they awaken something deep within, something you never knew existed. For me, that moment came on a warm Tuesday afternoon when my grandfather, Henry, opened his front door and discovered an envelope taped precisely in the center, like a bullseye. He peeled it away carefully, peering through his glasses, and I'll never forget the shadow that crossed his face. The letter imposed a $10,000 fine on him for what? An unauthorized exterior ornamentation, better known as the birdhouse he'd crafted for the neighborhood children. Let me be clear, this wasn't some shoddy structure dangling from a weathered nail. Henry had built it with care, using salvaged wood from a barn he'd helped construct half a century ago. He painted it in soft pastel hues and etched a simple phrase along the side: "Kindness is free." That birdhouse wasn't just decoration, it embodied who he was. But that meant nothing to Margaret, the Homeowners Association HOA president of Pinewood Estates. She wasn't just any HOA leader, she ruled the neighborhood as if it were her personal fiefdom. With her flawless blonde bob, ever-present clipboard, and a smile so artificial it chilled you, she dispensed fines like a child hands out sweets, targeting those least able to resist. Henry, Hovwang, lived in his home for over 4 decades without a single missed payment or infraction, was an easy mark until now. I was out of town when it happened, but Henry called me, insisting I shouldn't worry, that he'd sorted out. His voice, though, betrayed him. It trembled despite his effort to sound steady. I dropped everything and drove 6 hours that night to see the situation for myself. When I arrived, he tried to brush it off, but there on the dining table lay the letter, its red ink blaring numbers that defied reason. $10,000 for a birdhouse. I stepped outside to the front yard, and there it hung, swaying gently on a tree branch, a quiet testament to beauty in a place where such things seemed forbidden. I barely noticed Margaret strolling by, clipboard in hand, her smug look suggesting she'd just erased an eyesore. She glanced at me, paused, and said, "It's nothing personal. We have rules for a reason." I stared at her, then at the fine in my hand, $10,000 for an unauthorized structure on common YEW property. "It's in the bylaws," she added, as if quoting gospel. "You can appeal, but it's a 30-day process, and it won't change anything." She flashed that hollow smile again. Something snapped inside me. I thought, you've just crossed the wrong family. I've never tolerated bullies, and Margaret was the epitome of one. This wasn't just about money, it was about respect, principle, and how people like her wield false authority to intimidate good people into submission. Not this time. That night, I pored over every document Henry had: tax records, HOA newsletters, receipts for the paint he'd bought. I didn't sleep. Instead, I built a timeline, marked dates, and flagged inconsistencies. The deeper I dug, the more I uncovered Margaret had been fining residents for years over VY ollie ties, grass VY brand, fences too rustic, bikes left out by kids. She governed Pinewood like a petty tyrant, and the community had simply adapted. But I wasn't from here. I hadn't grown up bowing to such nonsense. With a background in tech startups, I knew how to thrive under pressure and dismantle flawed systems. Looking at that birdhouse, then at Henry sipping tea and pretending all was well, I vowed not just to appeal the fine or seek revenge, I'd unravel her entire regime from within. The next day, I attended an HOA meeting. Margaret presided at the head of the table, her voice slicing through the room as she reminded everyone to submit lawn photos for inspection. I sat in the back, watching silently. She barely noticed me, assuming I was just another upset relative who'd grumble and fade away. That was her miscalculation. While she droned on about VY Soul Harmony, I was plotting my move. I learned 2 things that night. First, Margaret had rewritten swaths of the HOA bylaws over the years, slipping in subtle clauses like one allowing her to reject appeals single-handedly. Second, the HOA was broke and poorly managed. Her fine obsession wasn't just about control, it masked her incompetence. I went home and researched HOA structures, discovering that controlling enough properties could sway or even seize the board. Margaret had done just that, owning 3 homes under aliases to secure her presidency. So I decided, if she'd bought her power, I'd buy it back, not for vengeance, but for justice. I called in favors from startup friends and built a discreet fund. I studied Pinewood's housing market. Properties languished unsold due to the HOA's notoriety. Desperate owners were eager to offload, especially for cash. Within a week, I'd quietly acquired 2 homes VY or an LLC, Within 3 weeks, 5. My name never appeared. I didn't want Margaret sensing the storm brewing. I even smiled at her when she passed Henry's house, clipboard in tow. She smiled back, oblivious that the birdhouse she despised would soon topple her. Henry didn't know my plan. I didn't want to raise his hopes, but before I left that evening, I knelt by his chair, looked him in the eye, and said, "Don't worry about the fine. I'll fix this." He gave a puzzled smile and said, "It's just money not worth the stress." But he didn't see. It was never about money. It was about what that birdhouse stood for, a small kindness someone dared to punish. I wouldn't play by Margaret's rules anymore. I'd write new ones. Pinewood's calm facade, neat lawns, uniform fences, silent streets hid a rotten core. My goal was straightforward: decode Margaret's system, expose its flaws, and dismantle it internally. What I found was uglier than I'd imagined. She'd turned the community into her personal domain, and no one had dared resist. I started with the HOA handbook, her so-called sacred text. At first glance, it seemed standard rules on lawn height, paint colors, mailbox styles, but it had morphed into a tool of oppression. Margaret had added vague, malleable rules. Exterior features must meet community standards, or decorative additions require HOA aesthetic approval. Who decided compliance? Margaret, always Margaret. The HOA board was a sham: 5 members, 3 absent for months, 1 her cousin voting by proxy, meaning Margaret voted, and 2 too weary to fight. She ruled alone under a democratic veneer. This wasn't mere mismanagement, it was domination. Residents feared her. I saw it in their averted gazes when she passed. I asked a few about their experiences. Some shut their doors, others whispered through cracked windows. An elderly woman said she'd been fined thrice in a month for dusty shutters and incomplete holiday decor. A man showed me a due lot $2,500 bill for trash bins vy Cybele post pickup for an hour. "Why not speak up?" I asked. He shrugged. "You do, you're next." Margaret thrived on fear and silence. I couldn't do this alone. I needed allies, people she'd crushed who had nothing left to lose. I remembered Edith, a retired lawyer neighbor who despised Margaret. When I showed her Henry's fine, she snorted. "She's been inventing penalties for years." That birdhouse nonsense is bold, though. Edith was perfect, sharp, and fearless. She kept old HOA records, minutes, financials, violation logs. Amid the chaos, we struck gold proof of mismanagement. Funds for community events had vanished into oddities like a due lot $12,000 unapproved HOA sign or security for Margaret's protection, costing due lot $3,000. The EVY Denke piled up. Then came Jake, a 17-year-old 3 houses down, fined due law $500 for excessive skateboarding noise. His furious but powerless parents contrasted with Jake's readiness to rebel. He knew the neighborhood, had access to unmonitored group chats, and was in vy Cybele to Margaret she dismissed kids. His mistake. Jake connected me with more residents discreetly. We formed a quiet uprising, collecting fine copies, harassment tales, and foreclosure threats over petty rules. Margaret's web was vast but fragile, held together by fear. Now, that fear was turning to anger and action. We stayed cautious. If Margaret suspected us, she'd strike hard. EVY Denke went into encrypted folders, triple backed up. Edith drafted a report citing every violation: HOA policy, state law, federal housing rules. It was airtight. But we aimed higher. I'd bought properties silently, but needed more for a special election to oust Margaret's 60-fan tram homeowner support. Tough when they're terrified. So we pivoted. We didn't ask them to fight. We asked them to sell. More homes were for sale than I'd realized. Families fed up with Margaret's reign, unable to unload due to the HOA's reputation. I offered fair cash deals, and by month's end, my investor group controlled 11 properties, 11 votes. Margaret, fixated on banning distracting garden lights, didn't notice. The neighbors stopped whispering when she passed. They watched, waiting. The final move had to be flawless: one slip, and she'd crush us. I kept up the facade, even thanking her once for keeping us safe. She underestimated me, thinking I was just another outsider. She didn't see the network forming a coalition bent not on revenge, but peace. Margaret understood power, not peace. Her grip was slipping, and she didn't even know it.